Hi, we are back now, and the next contribution is the untitled Manifesto number 5 by Mattheis and Thekla Molnar.
Untitled Manifesto number 5. 11. Abstraction presupposes and reproduces and allows and alters embodiment. 12. Embodiment and or abstraction keep on turning. 13. Abstractly, however, embodiment entails reification. 14. Persistently critiques eschewed embodiment in A minor. 15. Still, embodiment of possibilities creates abstraction. Our aim? The countering of abstraction by loading up on abstraction. 16. Then and now, we are claiming basic abstractions. It's time to abstract bodies again. 17. It's abstract if and only if it's embodied. 8. Abstract embodiment abstract. 71. Embodied is it, if only, and if abstract is it again? 61. Again, body's abstract too. Time, it's 1, 2, 3. Are we now and then? (51) Abstraction on uploading by abstraction of countering the aim. 41. Our abstraction creates possibilities of embodiment. Still, minor I, in embodiment eschew critiques persistently. 31. Rectification entails embodiment, however abstractly. 21. Turning on keep abstraction or an embodiment. 11. Embodiment alters and allows and reproduces and presupposes abstraction.
The piece you just heard was untitled Manifesto number 5, and it's a joint piece by Thekla Molnar, who unfortunately cannot be in Hamburg today, and you, Nico. And so Nico's sitting with me here. Maybe you could start by contextualizing the piece a bit.
Yes, sure. Let me start by saying that it's a real pity that Thekla can't be here today, because they have to be in Budapest. Because this was a piece we really conceived from start to end together. So I'll try to speak for both of us in a sense, but there might be things Thekla would see differently. So within the context of Sweaty Dwellings, Thekla and I wanted to work on the relation between abstraction and embodiment. This is something which had been mentioned already earlier, relating to Sarah Ahmed and the question of the embodiment also of theory. So what we tried to do was to resist the urge to treat them as opposites. And in doing so, we took cues from recent writing on abstraction in queer and trans theory and set out to thematize the dialectical entanglement of these terms. And for this kind of provocative also intervention, we envisioned a manifesto seemed quite right. But here our second and more formal aim came in, namely to see whether we could drag the genre of the manifesto away from its typical form, from its typically masculinist and also sometimes quite imposing gesture. A core vehicle for doing so for us was to break through the linearity of the manifesto by working with palindromes. Perhaps we'll talk some more about this also. But I think here it's also important to acknowledge that, of course, we're not the first to critically play with the manifesto form, which has come a long way from the likes of Marinetti, and inspirations of manifestos in cyborg, cyber, as well as transfeminisms abounded, which we could build on. And of course, manifesto also materialize in more than digital ink on websites, for example, in this radio format. So we asked ourselves, what does abstracted embodiment sound like? And we got taken to speak the manifesto for us. We spoke in unison without ever saying the words. And the way abstraction presupposes embodiment and vice versa manifests in the acoustic operations you just heard.
Thank you. I would be very curious to hear, to talk a bit about you, with you, about the connection between palindromes in a feminist publication project.
Yeah, so let me first say the kind of basic notion of a palindrome we worked with is that of a text which runs backward in some sense. So the very typical image of the core concept of palindromes often refers to palindromes or reversals on the level of letters. So for example, damn it, I'm mad, which can be read the same way and has the same meaning forwards and backwards. But we worked with an expanded understanding of palindromes also on the level of syllables, or here also of words and sentences. And this might not have been very obvious on the first hearing, but there is a very important process of reversal going on between line 11 and the second line 11 you can hear in the piece. And so I think the link to a feminist publication practice for us was that palindromes in general already are a very relational kind of writing. They always require to link between beginnings and endings, or between the moments within a span of time. And so we also mobilized them in a sense to break with the linearity of text. And we're interested in this simultaneity of surprise and repetition, which can arise once one notices that, or once one encounters a kind of déjà vu moment where something rings perhaps also eerily familiar. And our hope is that the palindrome form can also invite a sort of compactness or minimalism, which we can mobilize against the grandioseness or imposingness of big manifestos. And also, I can't say too much about this here because I'm not so familiar with it yet, but it seems like there could also be an interesting feminist telling of the history of the palindrome form, which can be traced back at least to a Chinese writer called Su Hui in the 4th century before Christ. And last point on this perhaps is that we also try to question the stark symmetry which is often associated with palindromes by including glitches here and there.
I mean, I would love to hear this project or see it emerging. Maybe, I mean, you touched a bit upon, but maybe you would like to talk a bit more about the role of manifestos, because usually they are kind of call to action. So what do you want people to kind of, what do you want to activate, or who do you want to activate? So if you want to talk a bit more about this.
Yeah, I think I can't say so much about it because I want to repeat that we try to destabilize the concept of a manifesto as this imperative form, or also at the same time call into question the notion that all manifestos had very straight significations or contained very straight action plans and directives. Here we are in the tradition of, which Thekla could say much more about, Luigi Nono's Sound Manifesto, which already kind of abstracts away from a very concrete call to action in a manifesto. But still, it's important to us that this piece does not remain without directions or without taking a stance. And the stance I think we want to invite with this manifesto is, among other things, to move beyond a naive condemnation of abstractions and consider the entanglements between theory, abstraction, between embodiment, materiality, and also perhaps to invite re-engagements of value critiques, which often work through this notion of abstraction informed by transfeminisms.
Thank you. Maybe, I mean, I would also be quite interested, maybe I think you talked a bit about, or you talked a lot about your sources, but maybe you would mention some more sources you were specifically influenced by.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just name a couple. On the notion of abstraction, we especially worked with abstraction, or with recent writing on abstraction as a queer and artistic strategy and practice, which goes against the grain of the assumption that abstraction is necessarily perhaps deconnected from political agendas. And one source which has been important to us here is the writing by Lex Morgan Lancaster, who writes about the practice of abstraction as dragging away from figuration and representational politics, and thereby also builds on David Getsy's writing. And then a second archive perhaps we could draw on was where Marxist takes in value theory. Here I only want to explicitly mention the writing by Joni Eliza Cohen, who very insightfully analyzes how transmisogyny and anti-Semitism work through a condemnation of abstraction. And then on manifestos, the list is long, but a few which were at the forefront were the Xenofeminist Manifesto by Laboria Kuponix, the Glitch Feminist Manifesto by Legacy Russell, and the perhaps a bit older one, the Post-Transsexual Manifesto by Sandy Stone.
Thank you. And I also want to thank you, also Thekla and you, for bringing a lot of resources throughout the whole project. Which was super nice, or is super nice. And you also, we will publish maybe a note to this. We will publish a reading list, or like a list of resources on our website. Maybe one last question, because the title is quite. I mean, I'm curious to hear a bit about the title. How you came up with it.
Yes, the title. So, well, the untitled part of the title is definitely a reference to a lot of naming of works, which happens in especially the visual arts, especially also with abstract artists, and some abstract artists also associated, at least with lesbianism, such as Agnes Martin. The number, I think we included to indicate that we are building on these sources, we are building on others, and also that this stage of the manifesto is perhaps but an unfinished stage, as manifestos typically are. And why number 5 particularly? Well, let me say only so much on this, that we tried to see both sides, and again try to reverse ideas of clear beginnings and endings.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will have a small break with music now, and then we are back in a few minutes.